The secure satellite phone rang at 3:17 a.m. Kabul time, slicing through the low hum of classified servers at our forward operating base. I was deep in a financial intelligence briefing about Iranian sanctions violations when my encrypted device buzzed with the emergency family code. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were tracking a $50 million weapons procurement network, and I was scheduled to brief the Joint Chiefs in 6 hours. "Sarah, thank God you picked up." Karen's voice crackled through the encrypted connection, breathless with what sounded like excitement mixed with whine. "I have incredible news about your little house situation back home." I stepped away from the wall of monitors displaying terrorist funding flows and moved into the soundproof booth we used for personal calls. As a senior financial analyst for the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, I spent my days unraveling the financial networks that funded everything from ISIS operations to North Korean missile programs. My family back in suburban Maryland thought I was some kind of glorified bookkeeper who processed routine paperwork. "What situation, Karen?" I asked, though my stomach was already tightening. Karen's definition of helping usually involved assuming she knew better than everyone else. "Don't play dumb with me, Sarah. We all know you're drowning with that mortgage on your pathetic government salary. I found the perfect solution." My blood chilled. The modest 3-bedroom colonial in Arlington had been my home for 8 years, purchased with a VA loan right after I graduated from Georgetown with my master's in international finance. What Karen, and none of my family, understood was that when you hold a top-secret SCI clearance and work in financial intelligence, every asset you own gets registered with multiple federal security monitoring systems. The house wasn't just my residence. It was classified as a protected federal asset due to my clearance level, overseas assignments, and the sensitive nature of my work. "Karen, whatever you're thinking of doing, I already handled it." Her voice was triumphant, like she'd just solved world hunger. "The paperwork is completely done. You're going to thank me when you're not lying awake stressed about money every night." "What paperwork?" I asked, already pulling up my secure laptop to check my property monitoring alerts. "The sale documents, obviously. I found a buyer willing to pay $300,000 cash for that little place. You can rent something actually affordable and finally live within your means instead of pretending you're successful." Identity theft. Wire fraud. Forgery. Fraudulent property transfer of a federally monitored asset. Each word she spoke was another federal felony that would trigger automatic investigation protocols from at least 4 different agencies. "Karen, listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice level while my fingers flew across the keyboard. "You cannot sell my house. You don't have power of attorney and you don't understand what you're dealing with." She laughed, the same condescending sound she'd been making since we were kids. "Sarah, sweetie, family helps family. I've had all your important documents since you asked me to collect your mail during your deployment. It wasn't exactly rocket science to figure out the signatures." On my screen, the federal monitoring system flashed red alerts. Unauthorized access attempts on my property records. Suspicious document filings. Irregular signature patterns detected by authentication systems. "Karen, what you're describing is federal identity theft and document forgery. You need to stop whatever process you've started immediately and call me back." "Too late, little sister. Closing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. sharp. Consider it a family intervention. We're saving you from your own bad financial decisions." The line went dead. I stared at my encrypted phone, calculating time zones while pulling up secure communication channels. It was 6:30 p.m. back in Maryland, meaning Karen had spent her entire day completing whatever fraudulent documentation she'd prepared. I immediately initiated emergency protocols, contacting my security officer at Treasury, my clearance investigator at OPM, and the FBI liaison who handled federal employee security compromises. Within 2 hours, I had confirmation that unauthorized activity had been detected on my property records, banking information, and federal identity documents. Federal monitoring systems had flagged multiple suspicious transactions and document filings. Investigation protocols had been automatically initiated across Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and Homeland Security's Identity Theft Task Force. The next morning, I was on the first available military transport back to Andrews Air Force Base. 3 days later, my overseas deployment cut short by what was now being classified as a federal security incident, I walked into my parents' split-level house in Silver Spring. The scene that greeted me looked like some kind of celebration. Karen was holding court in the living room, surrounded by our parents, Uncle Mike, Aunt Linda, and my cousin Jennifer. Empty champagne bottles cluttered the coffee table alongside what appeared to be a spread of legal documents. "Sarah." Mom jumped up from the couch, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like Chardonnay and her favorite vanilla perfume. "Sweetheart, Karen told us all about the house sale. We're so proud of you for finally accepting help when you need it." Dad nodded approvingly from his worn leather recliner, gesturing with his beer bottle. "It's about damn time you stopped being so stubborn about family support. Karen probably saved you from foreclosure and bankruptcy." Uncle Mike raised his bottle in a toast. "To Karen, for having the guts to do what needed to be done." I looked around at their smiling, slightly drunk faces. Karen sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the coffee table like she was conducting a business presentation, manila folders and legal documents spread out in front of her like she just closed the deal of the century. "Sarah, sit down," she commanded, patting the couch cushion beside her. "I want to walk you through exactly how I saved your financial future." I remained standing, noting the specific documents visible on the coffee table: deed transfer forms, power of attorney documents, property sale agreements, bank routing authorizations, notarized signature affidavits, each one bearing what appeared to be a forged version of my signature. "Your boring government job can't afford this mortgage," Karen announced loudly, holding up what looked like fraudulent deed transfer documents like they were a trophy. "I finally helped you be realistic about your actual financial situation." Everyone nodded enthusiastically, like she just delivered a TED talk on personal finance. I checked my secure watch. 2:22 p.m. If Karen was telling the truth about a 2 p.m. closing, the fraudulent transaction had been completed 22 minutes ago. Federal monitoring systems would have already detected the unauthorized property transfer and triggered investigation protocols. My encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message from my Treasury security officer. "Flash override. Federal response initiated. Multiple agencies coordinating. Cleanup crew en route to target location. Maintain operational security until contact." I looked up at my celebrating family, who were now passing around the fraudulent documents like they were examining a newborn baby. "Karen," I said quietly, "I need you to understand something very important about that house." "What's to understand?" she laughed, shuffling through her paperwork. "It was a financial burden you couldn't afford, and now it's not your problem anymore. The house isn't just my personal residence." Karen's smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "It's a regular house in a regular neighborhood. When you work in financial intelligence with a top-secret security clearance, all of your assets are registered with federal monitoring systems. Any unauthorized activity involving those assets triggers automatic investigation protocols." The room got quieter. Uncle Mike let out a skeptical chuckle. "Sarah, you work at some kind of government accounting office," he said. "Stop trying to make it sound so important." I pulled out my secure credentials wallet and set it on the coffee table next to Karen's fraudulent documents. My top-secret SCI clearance card was visible through the clear plastic along with my Treasury Department badge, diplomatic passport, and NATO security authorization. "I'm a GS-14 senior financial analyst for Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control," I said calmly. "I track international money laundering for terrorist organizations, drug cartels, and sanctions violators. I spent the last 8 months in Afghanistan tracking ISIS funding networks and Iranian weapons procurement operations." Karen picked up my credentials wallet with shaking hands, studying the official seals and security features. "These look," she started, then trailed off. "Official? They are official. And the house you just illegally sold has been under federal security protection monitoring since I received my clearance 8 years ago." Dad's beer bottle paused halfway to his lips. "Security protection monitoring? What the hell does that mean?" "It means any unauthorized transaction involving my property automatically triggers federal investigation protocols from multiple agencies: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, fraudulent notarization, banking fraud. Every crime committed in the process gets immediately flagged by federal monitoring systems and referred for prosecution." Mom's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor and sending Chardonnay splashing across the coffee table documents. Crimes, she whispered. Karen was helping you. Karen forged federal documents, committed systematic identity theft against a federal employee, and fraudulently transferred protected federal property. Each of those crimes carries mandatory minimum sentences. Aunt Linda was staring at my credentials like they might bite her. Sarah, please tell me you're exaggerating about your job importance. I make $164,000 a year base salary, plus overseas pay differentials, hazard pay, and security bonuses. Last year, my total compensation was $287,000. The house has been completely paid off for 3 years. The room went dead silent, except for the sound of Mom's broken glass crunching under Jennifer's shifting feet. Paid off. Dad's voice was barely audible. I live modestly for operational security reasons, not financial reasons. Federal employees with my clearance level can't display wealth or live ostentatiously. It creates security vulnerabilities and makes you a target for foreign intelligence services. Karen sank back into her sitting position on the floor, fraudulent documents scattered around her like fallen leaves. But you always complained about bills when you called home. You drove that beat-up Honda for years. Operational security requires maintaining a low profile and operational cover. The Honda is armored and equipped with federal tracking systems, encrypted communications, and emergency beacon technology. Most of my real assets are held in classified trust accounts that can't be disclosed for security reasons. Uncle Mike's face had gone pale. Sarah, please tell me you're joking about federal crimes. I reported the security compromise to my federal security officer 3 days ago when Karen first called me in Afghanistan. Federal monitoring systems flagged the unauthorized activity on my property records yesterday morning. Investigation protocols had activated automatically when the fraudulent transaction completed 22 minutes earlier. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door, 3 precise raps, a pause, then 2 more. The federal law enforcement identification pattern. Everyone froze like deer in headlights. That's not a social visit, I said quietly, checking my secure phone for confirmation messages. Dad started to rise from his recliner, but I held up my hand. Please let me handle this. Everyone, stay exactly where you are and keep your hands visible. I opened the front door to find 4 serious individuals in dark business suits. The lead agent held up her credentials in a black leather wallet. Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division, she announced in a clear, professional voice. We're executing federal warrants for Karen Elizabeth Thompson in connection with wire fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent transfer of protected federal property. Behind her stood Agent Chin from Treasury's Criminal Investigation Division, Agent Rodriguez from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Special Agent Williams from the Secret Service Financial Crimes Task Force. I stepped aside. The subject is in the living room with family members. All fraudulent documentation appears to be present on the coffee table. Agent Martinez entered the living room, taking in the scattered documents, broken glass, and terrified faces. Which individual is Karen Elizabeth Thompson? Karen had gone completely white, frozen on the floor, surrounded by incriminating evidence. I am Karen, she whispered. Agent Chin was already photographing the documents on the coffee table. We have deed transfer forms, power of attorney documents, banking authorizations, and property sale agreements, all bearing forged signatures of the protected individual. Agent Martinez addressed Karen directly. Miss Thompson, you are under arrest for violations of federal wire fraud statutes, identity theft of a federal employee, forgery of federal documents, fraudulent banking transactions, and unauthorized transfer of protected federal property. Behind her stood Agent Chin from Treasury's Criminal Investigation Division, Agent Rodriguez from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Special Agent Williams from the Secret Service Financial Crimes Task Force. I stepped aside. The subject is in the living room with family members. All fraudulent documentation appears to be present on the coffee table. Agent Martinez entered the living room, taking in the scattered documents, broken glass, and terrified faces. Which individual is Karen Elizabeth Thompson? Karen had gone completely white, frozen on the floor, surrounded by incriminating evidence. I am Karen, she whispered. Agent Chin was already photographing the documents on the coffee table. We have deed transfer forms, power of attorney documents, banking authorizations, and property sale agreements, all bearing forged signatures of the protected individual. Agent Martinez addressed Karen directly. Miss Thompson, you are under arrest for violations of federal wire fraud statutes, identity theft of a federal employee, forgery of federal documents, fraudulent banking transactions, and unauthorized transfer of protected federal property. Protected federal property? Mom asked in a shaky voice. Agent Rodriguez consulted his tablet. When federal employees hold top-secret security clearances and work in sensitive financial intelligence roles, their personal assets receive special protection status under federal law. Any unauthorized activity involving those assets triggers immediate multi-agency investigation and prosecution. Special Agent Williams began collecting the fraudulent documents as evidence. We'll need to conduct individual interviews with everyone present regarding their knowledge of the criminal conspiracy and document forgery. Karen tried to stand on shaking legs. How much trouble am I in? I was just trying to help my sister with her financial problems. Agent Martinez consulted her enforcement tablet. Wire fraud involving amounts over $100,000 carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Identity theft of a federal employee carries a mandatory minimum of 15 years. Fraudulent transfer of protected federal property adds another 10 to 15 years. You're looking at 30 to 50 years in federal prison, plus restitution and federal court costs. Dad made a choking sound and collapsed back into his recliner. 50 years, Jennifer whispered. Agent Chin continued documenting. The Hendersons who purchased the property are also under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud and receiving stolen property. Their $300,000 payment has been frozen as evidence and proceeds of federal crimes. The property transfer has been voided by federal court order. Uncle Mike found his voice, though it came out as a croak. What about the money Karen put in that trust account she set up? All accounts opened using stolen federal identity credentials have been frozen and seized as evidence, Agent Rodriguez explained. The funds will be held pending federal prosecution and restitution proceedings. Agent Martinez turned back to Karen. Miss Thompson, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you by the Federal Public Defender's Office. As they continued reading Karen her Miranda rights and applied federal restraints, she looked at me with tears streaming down her face and mascara running. Sarah, please, she begged. I was honestly trying to help you. I thought you were struggling financially. I thought your job was just routine paperwork. I met her eyes calmly. Karen, you committed multiple federal felonies based on assumptions you never verified. You never asked about my actual financial situation or the nature of my work. But your job seemed so boring when you talked about it. Operational security requires that I can't discuss classified aspects of my work. When I say I process financial documents, I can't explain that those documents involve tracking terrorist funding networks and international weapons procurement. Agent Chin addressed my parents directly. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you will be required to appear before a federal grand jury to testify about your knowledge of the fraudulent documents and criminal conspiracy. Mom burst into tears, her sobs echoing off the living room walls. We didn't know they were federal crimes. We honestly thought Karen was helping Sarah with financial problems. Ignorance of federal law is not a legal defense, Agent Martinez explained. However, full cooperation with the federal investigation may be considered by prosecutors during sentencing recommendations. They began escorting Karen toward the door in federal restraints, her hands cuffed behind her back. She turned one final time, desperation clear in her voice. Sarah, please. Can't you call someone? Use your government connections to fix this somehow. I shook my head slowly. Karen, I am the government connection. And you committed crimes against federal monitoring systems that automatically trigger prosecution protocols. There is no fixing this through personal intervention. Agent Rodriguez handed me a federal evidence receipt and contact information. Miss Thompson, we'll need your cooperation with the ongoing investigation and prosecution. Your security officer has already been briefed on the incident resolution. As the federal agents drove away with my sister secured in the back of their vehicle, I looked around the living room at my family's shocked faces and the evidence of Karen's criminal activity. Sarah, Dad said quietly, still in shock. How much money do you actually make in that government job? Enough to own my house outright, Dad. Enough to live comfortably without needing anyone's financial help or intervention. Mom wiped her streaming eyes with a tissue. Why didn't you ever tell us about your real job? Because federal employees with top-secret security clearances are legally prohibited from discussing classified aspects of their work or revealing details that could compromise national security operations. It's actually a federal crime for me to disclose specific information about my position, clearance level, or operational assignments. Aunt Linda, still picking up pieces of broken wine glass with trembling hands, asked, "What happens to Karen now?" She'll be processed through the federal detention system, appear before a federal magistrate for arraignment, and face prosecution in U.S. District Court. Given the scope of the crimes and the federal mandatory minimums, she's likely looking at significant federal prison time. Uncle Mike slumped forward in his chair. We completely screwed this up, didn't we? You supported and celebrated someone who was committing systematic federal crimes against a family member. Karen made the criminal choices, but everyone in this room encouraged and enabled her criminal activity. Jennifer spoke quietly. Sarah, we had no idea about your security clearance or your real job responsibilities. You had no idea because you never asked. You all assumed I was financially struggling and professionally unsuccessful based on surface appearances and operational security requirements. I gathered my credentials from the coffee table and headed toward the front door. Sarah, wait. Mom called desperately. Where are you going now? Back to my job. I have international terrorist funding networks to investigate, sanctions violations to prosecute, and classified briefings to prepare. National security work doesn't pause for family criminal activity. Dad struggled to his feet. Will we see you again after all this? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. That depends on whether this family can accept that your boring government employee daughter actually has her life together and knows what she's doing professionally and financially. We're so sorry, sweetheart, Mom said through fresh tears. We completely misjudged your situation. You misjudged my situation because you made assumptions instead of asking questions. You decided I needed rescue instead of asking if I actually needed help. What can we do to fix this? Aunt Linda asked. Hire Karen, the best federal defense attorney you can afford. She's going to need expert legal representation for multiple federal felony charges. And what about us? Dad asked. The federal grand jury testimony? Tell the truth about what you knew and when you knew it. Cooperate fully with federal investigators, and maybe consider that government employees sometimes have more important jobs than you realize. I walked out to my armored Honda, the one they'd always mocked as a beat-up economy car, and drove back to my fully paid-off house in Arlington. My secure communication device showed 23 missed priority calls from Afghanistan, Germany, and Treasury headquarters. International financial crime investigations don't wait for family drama to resolve. 6 months later, Karen pled guilty to federal wire fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent transfer of protected federal property. She was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay $347,000 in restitution to the Hendersons and federal court costs. My parents sent a formal written apology through my federal security attorney, acknowledging their fundamental misunderstanding of my professional situation and financial status. They requested permission to visit me and rebuild our relationship after Karen's sentencing was complete. I declined through the same attorney. Some family relationships cannot survive the discovery that your boring government paperwork job actually involves protecting national security from international financial threats. Some assumptions about success and failure cannot be repaired after federal agents arrest your sister in handcuffs while she's surrounded by evidence of systematic criminal activity targeting you. But my house in Arlington remains secure, federally protected, and completely mortgage-free. International terrorist funding networks still require tracking and disruption. Iranian sanctions violations still need investigation and prosecution. The work continues at the highest levels of national security. The federal protection remains comprehensive and automatic. And sometimes the most boring-seeming government jobs turn out to be more critical to national security than anyone in your family ever imagined. Federal service means something. Federal protection means something. And federal justice, when you commit crimes against both, means serious consequences that family relationships cannot survive.